I am Grudy Cullen in the CapeCod.com News Center, and I'm joined today here by a candidate for the Plymouth and Barnstable State Senate seat. Do you mind just introducing yourself for our listeners?
Dylan Fernandez, running for state senate in Falmouth, Mashpee, Bourne, and Sandwich on the Cape, and also Plymouth, Plimpton, Kingston, and Pembroke in Plymouth County.
All right, awesome. Now, I want to hit some of the major topics, some of the major issues gripping the Cape and Islands region as of late. Kind of talk a little bit more about your stance, what you'd like to bring to the table if you were to win the seat. Starting first and foremost, wanted to touch on housing, how things have been going in the affordable sphere. Just this day, we were talking about a $25 million housing sale on Nantucket. That's not even approaching the records that have been set as of late. Hot real estate market, and also some issues with second home ownership, questions about accessory dwelling units and Airbnbs impacting short-term rentals. But what do you think our stance is with affordable housing currently? Are we doing better compared to recent years? Are things looking up, or do you think we've only gotten worse and need some major changes? How are things going from your perspective?
Well, housing is profoundly unaffordable for most families, working people, seniors who want to downsize on Cape Cod and on the islands. And there's a lot more we need to do to address the housing crisis. We did just pass in the legislature the largest housing bill in a generation, a huge bond bill that encapsulates a whole number of issues. It puts a lot more funding to housing, to the different types of housing that we need. There's funding in there for veterans housing. There's funding in there for public housing. All sorts of different housing buckets get significantly more funding. With Senator Sear and Sarah Peake and some others, we were able to carve out a particular piece for Cape Cod and the islands called the Seasonal Communities designation. This is an incredibly important piece for our region because now, for the first time, there'll be an office set up at the state level to give special regulations for seasonal communities like the Cape and Islands. We're a unique place. We have unique housing challenges that are inherent to us being a tourist and seasonal community. And so now we'll have an office to issue special regulations to help us deal with that. That is a huge win for our region. And as part of that, there's also components that allow municipalities to purchase housing and provide housing using public dollars for their workers. So, their firefighters, their police officers, their teachers, and the like, so that we can help sustain our communities. So this is a really big housing piece for local families, local workers, teachers, firefighters, veterans, housing pieces in there. And importantly, it's a real issue that distinguishes between me and my Republican opponent in this race because I voted for this legislation. My Trump supporting Republican opponent voted against it, and that's just shows how extreme my opponent is on this issue, being the only Republican in the entire region to vote against this critical housing legislation for Cape Cod and the islands. So, we're going to continue fighting for affordable and workforce housing for the people here, and we know that we need it, and we know that when we talk to the business community, it's the number one issue that they cite that's impacting them as well. So, a lot more to do on this. We've made big strides with the housing bill, with the particular carve-outs for the Cape and Islands, and those will improve housing in this area in the years to come.
Mhm. While I have you as well, I wanted to chat about climate change. Cape and Islands are frontal, their coastal communities are on the front lines of climate change, but that's also come with it a lot of development into technology with trying to make more sustainable homes. Also, offshore wind has been a major development as of late. So do you think we've taken enough steps to both protect the Cape and Islands region from literal effects like storms and erosion, as well as kind of its part in like developing EV charging infrastructure, as well as being a house for charging cables for the offshore wind industry? We've also recently had Vineyard Wind 1 one with its turbine failure, and that has led to a little bit of fallout, especially for Nantucket. Busy summer season, and some beaches had to be closed down due to fiberglass chunks and other things. So it's been a major issue. What are your thoughts? Do you think we're handling things well? Do you think there needs to be more accountability or more investment? Do you think we're moving apace? What are your thoughts when it comes to climate change, offshore wind developments, and this is the green sphere?
Well, there's two different components of this that are really impactful to our region. One is the being on track to hit our climate goals, and then the other is how do we adapt to an ever-changing environment and how do we adapt to climate change. Those are highly related, but two different things because Massachusetts right now we have some of the most forward-thinking climate goals in the country to get us to net zero by 2050, not only in the aggregate, but also sector to sector. So the transportation sector, home heating sector, electrical sector, all these things have their own targets as well. And this was passed several years ago. And so we're on pace. We're on track to hit those goals. That's a good thing. And we're on pace with, what the latest science says we need to be ratcheting down and doing our part around carbon emissions. So that's kind of one piece around what the state's been doing to lower carbon emissions. But the fact remains that, Massachusetts could get to net zero tomorrow, and the seas are still going to rise, somewhere between 1.5 to 5.5 feet. In the next century, storms are going to get progressively worse and have been getting worse. And we're on a sandbar, excuse me, stretching out into the middle of the Atlantic. So we're one of the most vulnerable places in the country, certainly one of, if not the most vulnerable place in Massachusetts when it comes to the impacts of the carbon emissions on our municipalities on this sandbar that we call home. And so that's the other piece of this. How do we adapt? How are we being resilient? Well, we passed municipal vulnerability preparedness legislation a couple of sessions ago, allowing every single community on the Cape and Islands, and every community has taken part of this, to get free grants or significantly reduced grants to do a vulnerability assessment of the town to see, sea level rise, what different parts of town infrastructure are going to be impacted, what neighborhoods are going to be impacted. And then once they do that, that opens them up for significantly larger grants to help with resiliency there. And so that means, preparing areas for increased sea level rise, increased storm surge, and also making really challenging decisions about places that you could put millions and millions of dollars towards, but no matter what, it's just not going to exist in the next, 40 or so years. And so it helps make, the plans help make the financial decisions a little more sound and to be a more responsible steward of public money when it comes to coastal resiliency and adaptation. And, a big part of this, which I think is probably the most important part, that we should be focusing on is the nature-based solutions when it comes to coastal resiliency. And so you're seeing a lot of interesting and good projects there. Salt marsh restoration, really important in not only preserving our environment and our beautiful, Cape Cod and islands home, but also restored salt marshes help take in water, so it's not spilling out onto the streets, spilling out into your home. Also doing the same with a number of projects around river restoration. So, one big project in Falmouth, for example, there's projects up and down the region doing this is around restoring rivers. So, the Coonamessett River is being restored so that now herring and other types of fish are being able to run through it. That's really important for the local ecology and environment, but also really important that that's restored because now, as seas get larger or storm surge or the storm comes, some of that water is going to be running into the rivers and that area rather than your neighborhoods and downtown areas. So, there's so much to do on this. This is going to be the greatest challenge facing us for the next few hundred years. And we need to be smart about how we're using public dollars because we don't want to just waste public dollars on things that and solutions that aren't going to work. Because the seas are just going to rise to the point they are, and we need to be investing first in nature-based solutions and then in other solutions to make sure we're protecting areas that we can protect.
hmm I did want to talk about water quality in general. That was related more to like wastewater and septic. But before we move on, did you also want to comment on like how offshore wind has been developing? Do we need to see more of that, or and there have been concerns from the Cape and Islands region as well. We're actually coming up on another solicitation in October for some that would be, I believe, the closest turbines would be about 30 miles off the coast of the Outer Cape. Is all this positive? You're feeling good about all of the investment that we're seeing in the offshore wind industry? Do you think maybe that the public needs a little bit more involvement, especially with things like Vineyard Wind, that turbine failure? What are your thoughts so far on how it's been going, how the rollout's been, and is there anything that you'd like to see changed or modified if you were to win the seat?
Yeah, there's a few things. I think, well, first, I think the the General Electric blade issue was a complete disaster, and they need to be held accountable, GE, for any damages done to the local communities, and be on the hook for those damages and for that support. No question in my mind there. And this is a GE issue. This is a GE turbine installed by General Electric contractors who are tasked with installing it. So there's no question. We've been really vocal about making sure that they're on the hook for that, making sure that, Nantucket in particular, but any impacted community and residents get fully reimbursed for any costs associated with it. And so I think that's been a challenge. Vineyard Wind's credit, they are the only American company doing blades. They could have gone with Vestas or Siemens out of Spain or Germany, but they hired the American company, and unfortunately, that's giving them some that the issue with the blade, and we need assurances that it can never happen again. There's also some bright spots in this, that we are an often overlooked area when it comes to economic development and financial support. And so, part of this is, bringing in a whole lot of jobs to our region. And so, the place servicing Vineyard Wind is out of Vineyard Haven, and that's, 50 to 70 good paying year-round jobs that will last the 30 years or however long, if longer, lifespan of the project. So, there's positives too around connecting what will be the, clean energy the pivot to clean energy with local jobs in a way that we just haven't seen with the fossil fuel industry. And those are permanent or at least long lifetime jobs, but then there's also 2,000 other jobs that have been created, many of which are in this area. And so, that's a positive too. And then there's programs at Bristol Community College, at Cape Cod Community College for students who want to get involved in the clean energy space so that they can get credits and move towards a degree that will land them a job right after community college to work in the space so that we're further, benefiting locals in this community. And by the way, on community college, this past budget year, for the first time, we made community college free for students, and so that's a really big deal coming this next year. And the environmental issues are another distinguished something that separates me from my Trump supporting Republican opponent in this race, and that there's environmental bill up this session. I voted for it. My Republican opponent voted against it, and I think that's a real a real challenge and problem because we do need leadership when it comes to protecting our environment here across Cape Cod and the islands.
All right. Now, as well, we have the water quality issue that relates, of course, you already mentioned the natural solutions when it comes to rehabilitating saltwater marshes, and we have cranberry bog investment as well now. But like, I'm specifically to like wastewater would be the major issue. A lot of stormwater runoff, a lot of old grandfathered in septic systems that we have here across Cape Cod have been starting to pose issues for the local water quality. Association of Preserve Cape Cod Executive Director Andrew Gottlieb talks about how the water is our resource that we're kind of selling from a tourism standpoint. It is the water quality of Cape Cod that makes it so appealing. Do you think that the are we clamping down through the Title V septic system regulation changes that would be forcing the citizens to upgrade their systems unless their town is doing some kind of community-based solution like building sewer systems? That's mostly to what they described as kind of like kick butts in gear to build the sewer systems. And but do you think is that a good solution? Is that a little bit of a overstep by the state to change those regulations, or is this just what we need, or is it just that we need more money for it? And then, of course, I also wanted to ask another major topic of water quality issues too. That would be the Cape Cod Bay and Holtec International potentially discharging wastewater from Pilgrim Nuclear Power Station into Cape Cod Bay. Now, I know that's two questions I'm hitting with you, but I wasn't quite sure if you just wanted to dovetail them together yourself or
Yeah,
not. But we can
sure.
tackle them
I'll
one
do
at a
my
time.
best.
But how is wastewater in Cape Cod? How is our water quality? Do we need more action from the state?
Yeah, well, our water quality isn't great. You know, I think
Headlines in the New
that's
York Times,
I think
unfortunately.
everyone, look, I think it's a challenge. We've had beach closures, in various places all over the Cape this summer because of water quality issues. That's not only bad for our environment, but obviously that's incredibly impactful to our economy. The reason that millions of people visit every year is for our water and that a pristine resource. And so we need to do everything we can to protect it. Yes, because it's our lifeblood here on the Cape Islands for residents that is so crucial for us. But then also it's the driver of how a lot of people make a living down here. So one of the things that in my first session in the legislature, the Cape delegation we created the Cape and Islands Water Protection Fund. This is the biggest water quality legislation in, definitely a generation, maybe two, for our region that's going to raise $1 billion over the next 30 years for water quality on the Cape and Islands, and it's paid for by a 2.75% excise on hotels, motels, Airbnbs. Very similar, almost exactly the same, actually, as to what you'd pay if you stayed in Worcester or Boston or Springfield. When you stay there, you don't even know it, but you pay 2.75% to their convention centers. That's what attracts people there. What attracts people here is our incredible water resources. And so this is a way to raise a whole lot of money, a big chunk of what's needed, but still not enough to address water quality concerns and issues here in a way that we're not doing it off of the backs of local residents. And I think that's really, really key is to mitigate costs as much as possible for local residents. And so another way we did that is through this past session, and we did $1 billion in tax cuts for the state. Has a whole lot of stuff in there. Senator Sear and the Senate and me in the House filed, or actually I in the House filed legislation not related to water quality, but I'll get to the water quality piece that was carved out for us around, it's called an Act to Mitigate Snowbird Relocation. Has nothing to do with birds, but has to do with the estate tax. We used to have the most onerous estate tax in the nation at $1 million. And so our legislation, which is almost identical to what Governor Healy filed, doubled it to 2 million and then got rid of this cliff effect that made it so if you just had $1,001, you were taxed on the full amount underneath that. So we got rid of the cliff effect. We raised it to $2 million. Now you're only taxed on the next $3 million. That's a huge win for residents of the Cape and Islands because the way home prices have increased here, this tax was really impacting middle class families here in our region. So we're happy to, really important piece that we got done for the Cape and Islands. But the tax piece related to water quality is that we tripled the septic tax credit. And so that's a huge deal for helping people install new septic systems if that's something that they need to do. So it went from $6,000 tax credit to 18,000. So it's very generous in terms of the total price of installing the septic system. And then after that $18,000, you can get a zero interest loan. And so it actually makes payments for it quite affordable, or significantly more affordable than what previously existed. And that will help with, installing some of these AI systems and systems that take out nitrogen at a greater rate than what is being taken out currently. And a lot of that nitrogen loading is what's causing our water quality issues across the Cape.
hmm Now, this is a Senate seat that was formerly held by State Senator Susan Moran, who has been a big proponent in the ongoing battle between opponents and Pilgrim Nuclear Power Station, Holtec International. They say that they've already appealed to try and get their permit modified so they could potentially discharge about 1 million gallons of wastewater into Cape Cod Bay from the old nuclear power station. They say it would be fine. The water's been treated, and they just are trying to get this as fast done as possible. They want to return the land back to the people. And they also say that the state does not have the authority to stop the discharge anyway. One, because they say that their application predates the Water Sanctuaries Act, the Ocean Sanctuaries Act, as well as that it's really up to the federal government to change whether or not they're going to be able to stop them from doing the permit to begin with. Now, this has been an ongoing fight as well for State Representative Matthew Mortore, your opponent. So I wanted to ask how you feel that has gone, essentially. What is your stance? Do you think it could have been done better? Do you think you could do a better job than Susan Moran, Matthew Mortore? And what is your decision on that? Do you think Holtec is in the right? Do you think that or do you think it'd be an issue to discharge the water and cause economic issues for the region?
Yeah, well, I'm actually one of 10 petitioners who's joined with the Association to Preserve Cape Cod to try to block the appeal. So, um, I feel very strongly that we shouldn't be dumping the nuclear waste, treated nuclear wastewater into Cape Cod Bay, and I feel that there's other solutions here, and those other solutions have been discussed at length and put on the table, and we need someone who can hold Holtec accountable and help deliver for us and holding them accountable. And what I see is public health and environmental safety negligence. And we've been really outspoken on this. We worked with the APCC on highlighting the Ocean Sanctuaries Act to the administration, which then resulted in that DEP ruling against Holtec. And I think it's really important that we have someone who has a seat at the table where decisions are made in the legislature. And just to be totally candid, there's only 4 Republicans in the state Senate, so they don't have any power to pass major legislation. They can hardly bring home any funding to the district. I'm the only candidate running actually who's passed statewide legislation. I brought significant millions more in funding from the state budget to our region. And so and then if you're in the majority, you automatically get a seat on, you automatically chair a committee in the legislature. And so just from and this is partly why I ran, because I don't want to see our district be left without a voice and a seat at the table where decisions are made at the state house. And that couldn't be more true for this issue of holding Holtec accountable. And it also couldn't be more true with making sure we have a voice and a seat at the table for the largest bridge infrastructure project in the country going into the heart of this district. And so It's really important, Grady, that we have someone who has the ability to be in the room where decisions are made, has a seat at the table, and can actually deliver for our region. And I'm the only person that will be able to do that. And I also have a track record in passing 30 bills and several statewide bills, only candidate to pass statewide bills, even though I've been there for fewer years. So I think that's a really important thing for the people of the Cape and Islands and across the Plymouth Barnstable district, because the decisions that are made for this region in the next few years when it comes to these big issues are going to impact us for the next century. So we really need someone who has a seat at the table and can deliver for us.
Next topic was actually bridges and transportation anyway. So is there anything else we wanted to add about that ongoing effort to get more money for the Bourne replacement project? Sagamore Bridge has been funded, which is great news for everybody who's been trying to get that sorted for the past few years now, but Bourne, not quite yet. But is there anything else you wanted to add in that ongoing struggle about representation, what your goals would be?
Well, I think it's important to have someone who has a seat at the table who can make sure that the communities are that they're being listened to, that are impacted, and in terms of Plymouth, Bourne, Sandwich, and the surrounding communities that are going to be particularly impacted by these projects. Really important they have a seat at the table. Really important that we get the additional funding for the Bourne Bridge. I mean, I'm thrilled that the Sagamore Bridge is fully funded. It's still going to take a decade for that bridge to be completed, or at least that is the current timeline. And now we need to pivot hard to the Bourne and make sure that the state is doing everything it can to attract federal funding. And so that's really important, and it's important for people to understand that these are bridges owned by the federal government. They are operated by the federal government. The federal government is on the hook for maintaining them. And so we need to make sure that they are not negligent in supplying the funding to the state to fully fund the Bourne Bridge. And we need to make sure from the state level that we're properly matching the funding to be competitive in those grants. That's something that and sadly, the Baker administration failed to do that when they were applying for federal grants. They weren't putting up enough money to be competitive. And that's why for years and years and years, funding for these projects languished. And it wasn't until the Healy administration came in and recognized that the Baker administration wasn't even putting up enough funding to match, that they doubled the funding, and we've been able to secure the $2 billion plus dollars from the federal side. And so we need to, I have a lot more confidence now in the Healy administration to go after these federal funds. But that we've been kind of set back on a timeline because of decisions made by the previous administration. So we got to stay focused on this, and we got to make sure that the feds fund these bridges. And if they don't fund them, we also need to start thinking about contingencies in place to make sure that these bridges, the Bourne Bridge, is built, because this is the lifeline for so many residents. And there's a 2020 Army Corps major rehabilitation report that says that if the Bourne Bridge is not funded, but doesn't receive funding by 2029, then the entire bridge will shut down for 9 months. And then for 2 years after that, we'll shut down to one lane traffic. That would absolutely cripple the Cape and Islands economically, and just from a living here perspective, as I do, and I think all the listeners do, it's just a non-starter for us, and that just cannot happen. There's no scenario in which that can happen. So we need to get the federal funding. I think a big part of this is around who our next president will be, and in terms of being able to access future funding. And then, I also think that we on the Cape and in the state need to be thinking about and putting plans in place too to come up with contingency options for us.
Mhm. We're about coming up on time, but I did want to touch on immigration while I still have you. Of course, Cape Cod has been host to several emergency shelters, not any currently, but there has been quite an interest in how that is going to develop from the intersection of regional state policy and federal immigration policy too. How do you think things have gone? Would you like to see more accountability? I know Governor Healy did just recently change the way of who is prioritized as part of the emergency sheltering system. But it's come up even as like housing assistance corporations looking to build a family shelter in Dennis and has received some pushback with residents are still concerned, like, is it primarily going to serve migrants? So how do you think the state has been handling it? Would you like to see anything different? Are the prioritization changes by Healy enough? How are things from your point of view?
Well, I'd like to see a lot different. I mean, I think the federal government has completely abdicated its responsibilities around immigration. And, I think that we should have, the bipartisan bill at the federal level, which would have significantly stemmed the flow of immigration, helped completely change the asylum process, had more border security, and actually given more money back to the states dealing with this. I would have been, had I been in Congress, I would have supported that bill. The issue for us on the state level is that the border, Massachusetts obviously doesn't control the border. And then the asylum process, the visa process, the H-2B visas, all of the immigration policy, the state doesn't have control over that. That's all federal statute. So the best the state can do is just manage with what we're given from the federal government. And, we've had to change our right to shelter law in the state. There's no longer a right to shelter in Massachusetts. That had to be considerably reformed. So now it's only 9 months at most if you can even get into the shelter program, and then the emergency shelter on top of that has been significantly reduced. I think it's down to like 5 days now. I passed legislation to make sure that veterans were given preference in the shelter program. Passed that through the House. That was signed by the governor. And so, it has been a cost to the state. And so, maybe there will be further reforms depending on what we see in the coming period. But look, I also, am very empathetic and sympathetic to the people here. I mean, they are, so the vast majority, so in our shelter program, about, half of it is recent immigrants. And the vast majority of those people are from Haiti. Haiti is a collapsed state that's run by gangs. If I had a family there, like you bet I'd be doing the same thing, trying to get out and save and protect my family. And the people in the shelter program are either pregnant women or families with children. Those are the two sources of eligibility. And so I have a lot of empathy for that circumstance. And by the way, these people, despite, a lot of rhetoric out there, these people are here legally. They through the TPS program. This is a federal program started, I believe, by H.W. Bush. Because they're coming from a collapsed state, they get, an asylum designation. So it's not an illegal designation as some people like to frame it as. And so that's just kind of the reality of the situation. And we need to make, because the feds are being negligent in their duties, we need to make really tough decisions at the state level. And so, we reform no longer right to shelter. We reform the amount of time to stay there. We reform the emergency shelter process. All of this will help save the state money. And then, the further reforms are on the table going forward. I will say, we've made these reforms. We also, from a state budget perspective, even though last year it did cost a significant amount of money, we also had a balanced budget that actually has the highest rainy day fund in Massachusetts history. So, fiscally, we're actually, as a Commonwealth, we're actually in a decent situation, but it's something we need to continue to stay on top of.
All right, now we're coming up on time. Just wanted to ask one of our last questions, which is just why should someone vote for you instead of Matthew Mortore? What sets you apart from your opponent? In your opinion, what gives you the appeal?
Well, I think one of the most important things that sets me apart is that I'm the only person running who voted to support the Roe Act for women's reproductive freedom. My Republican opponent voted against the Roe Act, which would have taken away women's right to reproductive freedom. And in Massachusetts, this is something I think is really important to support. I don't think the government should tell women how to control their bodies. I think women need to have that control, and so that's an issue that definitely distinguishes us. I think it's an important issue given what we see going on nationally with rollbacks to women's reproductive freedom across the country. And I definitely have a record on this locally. When I first got elected, women didn't have access to reproductive freedom on the Cape. Actually, the closest place for abortion care was in Providence, Rhode Island. And so we worked with a local provider called Health Imperatives, got funding through the legislature, and just last summer, where women through Health Imperatives were able to access that service for the first time in 15, 20 years. So it's something I'm always going to support. My Republican opponent, voted against it, and I think there's obviously different values there. My opponent has been is a Trump supporter, has said something, has said several times during his primary that he's voting for Donald Trump, and I just don't think that's the right direction for our country. I don't think it's right for the Cape and Islands, and I think especially when it comes to securing bridge funding, I think it's really important that we probably have an administration that would be open to giving bridge funding to Massachusetts and to Cape Cod. And I think another big thing that distinguishes us is just the ability to deliver, right? Like I've passed 30 bills into law. I've brought in millions of dollars for the district, millions more in legislative funding than my Republican opponent. And also, I'm the only person running, even though I've been elected for a shorter period of time, to pass statewide legislation. I passed several statewide bills. And so, I think someone who can lead with our values, but also has that ability to make sure that we have a voice at the state house and are not overlooked as a region. I think that's really important. I think that's what distinguishes me from my Republican opponent in the race.
All right, awesome, Dylan. Thank you so much for joining me for this conversation. It's been a pleasure. Last free bingo space, essentially. Is there anything else you wanted to highlight for our listeners while I still have you?
Yeah, I think that look, I think, pride myself on being accessible to people. I think people can reach out anytime they'd like. Website is dylanfernandez.com. Number is listed right on there. And always if people are struggling with something before the state, whether that's healthcare or unemployment insurance or any type of issue, to just reach out. We have a great team that works really hard for people in our region, and we've been able to help thousands of people over the years with different types of constituent issues. So don't be afraid to reach out, and if elected to the state senate, hope to serve you and the people of the Cape and Islands in greater capacity and help them get the help and support they need. And so just hope to earn your vote this November.
All right, awesome, Dylan. Thank you again for joining me for this conversation. It's been a pleasure.
Yep, anytime.
I'm Grady Collane in the Cape Cod.com News Center, and thank you for listening.